it doesn't seem to be overstating the case that there is some kind of global takeover by a particular cabal of people who all share a particular worldview, which seems to be a kind of managerial view of humanity, of what humanity should live under. And as someone who has been quite independent my entire life, I find myself viewing it with a great deal of horror, actually. What do you guys make of that?
Well, managerial is the right word, because the history of the World Economic Forum, as I'm sure you know, is that it was created in 1971, I think, as the European Management Forum, and Klaus Schwab is in fact a professor of management, and so he indeed ticks all the wrong boxes, because he is a managerist. He is the embodiment of James Burnham's managerial revolution. And I think the reason why we are, yes, the opposite of the World Economic Forum is the thing, probably to summarize, the thing that we hate most about it is this conjunction of big business, big corporate business, and leftism. In Britain and in other countries for many decades now, the right has allied itself with world capitalism, international capitalism. But I'm afraid, in my view, the right has chosen the wrong ally, because on the contrary, as we've seen only recently here in Britain with Nigel Farage's the cancellation of his bank account, we can see that big business, big banks, big corporations have become left-wing organisations, culturally left-wing organisations. So it's this drift of liberalism, or what pretends to be liberalism, towards the left, which the World Economic Forum embodies, I think, more than anything else.
I hate to say it, but I think it's not even what appears to be liberalism. I think it is,
yes.
It's kind of inevitable.
Well,
that liberalism
I mean, yes, I agree. I like you. I think it does actually come from liberalism itself. But on the other hand, we are now in a world where there is no rule of law, where property rights are, severely curtailed, if not completely destroyed, where there isn't really freedom of speech. So all those basic building blocks of classical liberalism have of course, in the recent developments, been brushed aside.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it is because liberalism is it is indeed in the actual essence of liberalism itself, which set itself up in the 17th century as a neutral structure. It would take Hobbes, the idea was the state would prevent conflict and so on. And then later on it was the market or the law, or these so-called neutral structures which were supposed to dissipate away social conflict. In reality, all declensions of liberalism are progressivist, and they want to improve society, to create a new man and so on. And so they can never let up. They're always seeking new dragons to slay. It's not a neutral system, liberalism. It's, on the contrary, a militant system. And that's why the programmatic book of late 20th or mid 20th century liberalism is called The Open Society and Its Enemies. And indeed, liberalism, I think, defines itself, in some ways I sometimes say a bit like Protestantism, only in terms of its enemies. And that's why it's constantly seeking new enemies to justify its own sense of progressivism.
It is interesting, isn't it, how it has this unspoken doctrine that allows it to render everything in reality as being in some way problematic, and progress is to break down all of these things. What do you think the end state of progress looks like? What's the destination?
There isn't an end state. That's the whole point. It is a constant revolution. It's a permanent revolution, because unless there are more and more enemies to find, then liberalism loses its purpose. That's why it keeps creating new enemies. That's why, so to take an example of wokeism, gay marriage came out of nowhere about 10 years, just slightly less than 10 years ago. Nobody expected the gay marriage thing suddenly to come onto the agenda, still less for it to be a totem for progressivism, because those countries that don't accept it are pilloried. And then hardly was that over, but now we have transgender, which is seems to be another madness. So I don't know what the next thing will be. Maybe the sexualization of children. and the normalization of paedophilia. But what I am certain of is that it's a constant process because of this desire for progressivism. It's essentially a progressive obsession, and it's the opposite of the conservative mindset, which is to regard reality as a source of wonderment, a source of inspiration, and of something which may lead to improvement, but also we all know that, you know, man is fallen in nature and that fundamentally human nature will always remain the same.
I'd like to advance a theory as to what I think the end state is of progressivism. I think that the problem with liberalism is essentially the fetishization of reason, and the raising of this to levels of essentially a divine quality,
Yes.
which renders the human body the issue itself. Because, of course, a man's will and reason are trapped within his own skull, which is attached to the rest of his corporeal form. And this leads them to find everything about material reality to actually be the problem.
Absolutely.
And therefore, everything becomes subject to the whims of a person's, just desires and will.
Yes.
And this means that essentially what they're trying to do is liberate themselves from their own bodies.
Absolutely. Well, that's the
Reality itself.
That's the Gnosticism that Vogelin talked about, which we see in the transgender movement, but what we see also in all the attempts to plan society. As you say, the fetishization of reason, or perhaps more precisely of will.
Well, I should have.
Because reason, after all, it's
a tool
to look at the world and to understand it and so on.
Yeah, but no, I think you're absolutely right. But this, I'm glad you said it's a kind of Gnostic philosophy, because there are huge amounts of metaphysics attached to the idea that actually the will isn't the product of the body, which is ironic considering these people are all materialists. They don't have any theological views whatsoever, and yet it's all buried underneath the layer of materialism, and they can never really be honest about their own beliefs, can they?
Yeah, I mean, there are many contradictions. One of the things that strikes me most about the transgender movement, which you might think had come out of the 1960s and free love and so on, is that actually the transgender movement is not about sex. Because if you have a sex change operation, you can't have sex, as a matter of fact. So it's a very peculiar development. In fact, it's a dialectical opposite of the place where it started. But I think I think this dialectical thing, where one thing and its opposite can, as it were, both be true, is part of this cyclical and very destructive process of progressivism.
The issue I think that modern conservatives have is that A, I don't think they have this kind of level of understanding of what's happening, but B, they're also kind of married to liberalism, because in prior eras it seemed like a good idea and it didn't have this Gnostic seed of destruction as far as they could tell, and so it seemed perfectly reasonable to say, well, we want constitutional rights, we'd like free speech, we'd like all of these things, and now they're committed to a path that seems to lead to inevitable destruction of everything, not just our own societies, but in the sanctity of the human body. What foundations should conservatives be taking instead of the liberal foundations that they're on at the moment? Where should they begin from, really, do you think?
Well, I think you said it quite well, that the biological reality of life is essential. And that also pertains, obviously, to the great taboos regarding the immigration discussion. We are not allowed to talk about ethnicity. We're not allowed to talk about biology. This is the central taboo. And conservatives have accepted not merely the mindset of the liberal, the vocabulary, but also the taboos of the liberals. And it's my view that taboos are protectors, guarantors of an order, political order. And so as long as conservatives continue to be scared of these taboos and of being named all the swear words that surround the taboos, you know, racist, fascist, anti-Semite, homo-hater, COVID denier, climate denier, all these things, as long as they go to great lengths to avoid being labeled such, they will never come back to their actual beliefs and feel confident about them.
And in fact, that seems to be exactly the purpose of all of these smears.
Sure, they intend to incite fear into people, and the consequence is that they will sort of accept something. And there was just one more thing that I wanted to add. You mentioned the philosophical origins of liberalism, 17th century, all these things. I understand that, and I agree partly, but I also think that the liberal movement used classical freedom rights, like freedom of speech, to destroy an order. It was this comes from the French Revolution, where they essentially wanted to do away with, let's say, the church as an institution, and also aristocracy and a few other institutions, national states, national identities came later, and so they start using these rights as offensive weapons, and conservatives, being perhaps naive, they're like, okay, yeah, that's very good to have free debate, to have diversity. They are not interested in free debate. They are not interested in diversity. They are interested in using the pretext of diversity to destroy something. For example, to destroy sexual relations between man and woman and families and so on. That's why they promote this transgenderism, not because they're genuinely open-minded, but because they genuinely want diversity. They are insincere.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.